button. It is being recorded, so don't worry. You don't have to be on camera. If any of you are on camera, you can turn yourselves off of camera, okay? All right. So let me go ahead and introduce Omar. Omar Saghir Mir, Esquire, LLM, is an attorney at law who is licensed in and lives near the Washington, D.C. area. He has years of legal experience in areas including corporate, pharmaceutical, civil litigation, family law, antitrust, and property. He has worked on some matters involving family law, including divorces, prenuptial agreements, alimony, shared visitation arrangements, and custody. All right, so Omar is going to go ahead and talk to us for the next 25 minutes. What I would like for all of you to do is if you do have questions, let's keep them towards the end of Omar's talk, and then you can go ahead and put the questions in the chat as well if you'd like to. And I'm still admitting people. So you can go ahead and put everybody in put your sorry, your questions in the chat. I'm getting distracted because I'm hearing all the doorbells.
Yeah.
And and we'll go ahead and we'll make sure that your questions will be answered. And if your questions can't be answered, I know Omar will probably provide his contact information. You can send him a message on WhatsApp, I'm sure, and ask him questions later. All right. So Omar, I'm gonna go ahead and hand the floor over to you.
Hey, assalamu alaikum. Hey, and first of all, thanks, Aasiyah, for hosting this and for for everything. And thanks to everybody for us spending time on a weekday evening on a potentially interesting and important topic. Hey, Aasiyah, in your opinion, should we wait maybe another minute or two before if a lot of people are coming, or go ahead and go into it? Your thought?
I think we should go into it because it is being
Okay.
recorded. Yeah. So don't worry. If
Okay.
people are coming in, they'll catch you. We just started. So
Gotcha.
we're good.
Yes. All right, okay, cool. All right. So want to make this, I would say, an engaging and in, hopefully entertaining and intellectual chat conversation rather than more like a lecture, because I consider everybody as a, theoretical friend, colleague, rather than like a student or something, so, or client. All right. So basically, when we kind of start out talking about a topic, I kind of like to go with a who, what, why, basic kind of macro things. All right. So, one, kind of maybe slight misconception I think people may have, or kind of a general comment people may think of, is that prenups may be theoretically only for those who were, quote unquote, super wealthy or whatever they may call that amount. But really, these can be potentially useful for folks of any wealth level, class, so to speak. So that's a initial thing to say. So what actually is it? At base, it's a contract, of course, a written agreement between two parties who are represented by counsel before marriage, which is in essence, covers a huge financial aspect before, during, and maybe even post marriage. So when I have a client and to at the beginning of the process, and I would say other attorneys as well, like to ask questions and get a picture, not just financially, but I would say also personally. Meaning, I like to see maybe what the motivation or thoughts going into the marriage and having a prenup in place are. Even though I do recommend them and others do, I still like to ask like what two people's motivations are. Obviously, we also like to ask about the prior marital history, uh, you know, and also the number of kid or kids that each person has going into it, because that directly impacts clauses which relate to like support and alimony, provisions, payments. So when at the beginning of the process, basically a lawyer will ask both people spouses to help them develop a schedule of separate and personal assets that they have prior to the marriage. Okay, and it's done for several reasons. So, assets, that they possess, and also debts which they've incurred prior to entering into the marriage. So, typical assets, there's a huge class that, a, any, person A may bring into it. But the typical ones that we kind of focus on more on the schedule are things such as, savings, financial accounts, stock options, retirement accounts, vehicles, uh, you know, uh, real estate, property, etc. And typical substantial debts incurred, liabilities, loans they may have would relate to things such as like student loans, car loans, credit cards, etc. So what each spouse does is they, in good faith, I would say, and also, with all honesty and disclosure, what they do is each spouse develops like writes out a schedule at the guidance of their attorney. Okay, so let's see. What we do is when you have after you have these schedules developed, we kind of like to ask them other key questions at the beginning of the process, right? So what we do is we ask about things such as, you know, those assets which each person is bringing into the marriage. How do they prefer that they be handled during the course of the marriage? Because as you may know, basically, that there could be like increases, even deductions, but increases in values during the course of the marriage. And as a general idiom, basically, that gain is deemed to be a joint, you know, basically shared by both people as a general matter. So uh, we also ask about things such as, which assets would you prefer to have? Maybe sometimes it may relate to something as a car that each person brings in, or it may be like jewelry, it's like a personal item like that, which they may choose to, or a financial account, of course, which they may choose to have either remain separate and individually labeled, even during the course of, or even after the marriage. So we ask which ones they would prefer to have identified as separate property, even during the course of the marriage. Okay. So another couple of questions we ask is, uh, you know, specifically usually relating to like student loans, car loans, things like that, or home loans. If one spouse may pay off or help pay off one of those financial obligations, let's say the marriage unfortunately goes south and ends due to a divorce or unfortunately or something, then would that person who helped contribute to what was previously a separately owned asset, would they like to have that reimbursed after the divorce time? You know, and we also ask if the you know maybe they would like to have something as like a legal trust set up to maintain and hold, in theory, that separate property. So one thing I'll say before getting a little further into these aspects of the specific provisions for a prenup are, let's say, what happens if there is not a prenup, or what happens if it's held to be invalid? Then, what happens, especially in these states which have, there's a theory called equitable distribution, which means that equitable, the word means, it generally indicates a fairness or an equity or a 50-50 split. So what happens is that if in the absence of a valid prenup, basically that property at the end of a marriage or a divorce process would be deemed to be, at least initially, like at a 50-50 split. So that actually covers a lot of the basics in terms of the macro sense of a prenup agreement. So a few other things I want to mention. I would say a couple of them are more so specifically financially related, and then a few of them are more theoretical, uh, I would say legal idioms or protections and basically reasons for even having an agreement in the first place. So, as we talked about, even if an asset is still deemed to be separately owned, even from prior to and going during the course of a marriage, generally speaking, if both parties are helping contribute, like maybe payments or that the property is going to be jointly owned, an increase in the value of that separately owned car or whatever it may be is deemed to be, basically that appreciation of value is deemed to be like enjoyed by both, uh, valued by both people. But what you can have is you can have, as I may have said earlier, you can still at the time the prenuptial agreement, like have a specific asset, even for the increase of valuation, still remain to be separately recognized, I should say. You can also have provisions for what we say like the premarital debts or like the loans and obligations for student and car or maybe some other things. What you can do is you can have a provision kind of written out which basically declares whether both parties were held to be responsible and at what percentage, or whether it's deemed to be, let's say, like person A's student loan, so that that person is going to be basically responsible for it. So I would say, like in the absence of, having that provision, it's generally thought to be like a shared liability, but you can, you can have it still remain as a separate obligation. Um, so of course there's support and alimony payments that could come in theoretically is a pretty big issue as well for kids that either or both spouses may have from a prior marriage, of course, that you have during the course of the present marriage as well. So, what there are in a lot of states are what they call a predetermined, spousal support and also child support guidelines. And I can go into the statutes, but I don't want to get too in the granular at this point. And basically, those support guidelines, which are deemed to be fair, by a state legislature and a court, are basically what guides how those support payments are made, you know, uh, during the course of a divorce, proceeding. But what can happen is during the course of a marriage, either or both spouses' jobs, may change, or their statuses, their income level, their salaries, etc., may change. So what a lawyer can do is of course staying apprised with their client or being updated by it at, when there's a significant, let's say, change in salary. They can basically have a provision which is made to basically adjust that amount which is otherwise decreed under the state guidelines. um let's see. So basically, another thing we'll cover is, let's see, what happens with property which is like set to be inherited if the marriage actually ends by death rather than divorce, you know. Well, what would typically well, not recommend, but require for a client to sort of, you know, understand and agree to at the beginning is basically, you know, a fair allocation to each child and also to the surviving spouse of what that basically inheritance percentage will be. So there are provisions for inheritance as well. And then another one I'll mention is business earnings, because people may like, I have my own practice, but you know, somebody may have like their own, you know, business, and you know, not only do we look at, or you got to consider what happens if that business, you know, thrives over time, and uh, you know, we insert provisions as to whether the profits, which are generally deemed to be, you know, let's say jointly appreciated and earned, is you can have a provision which says, since it was that person's business before the marriage, you know, basically you can have like a certain allocable percentage, meaning like if the let's say like some businesses really thrive or something, and you know, become Fortune 100 or whatever it may be, that you can actually allocate what percentage apart from 50-50. You can change that as which percentage of the profits are recognized by a certain spouse. So that covers most of what I'd like to talk about at the beginning. A few other, these are more so theoretical rather than financial kind of things, I would say, but um, you know, let's see. So one reason for, or one advantage of having basically a prenup at the beginning is to basically have, uh, you know, a joint understanding and appreciation from each spouse, that basically they're in agreement, they're willingly agreeing to these provisions, right? So what that can help, you know, avoid is during a divorce from things becoming too contentious. You know what I mean? Because like things such as how uh, debts were paid off, how profits were recognized or enjoyed by each party, you know, things which can usually get kind of a little bit sticky during the divorce process. An advantage of the prenup is that you can, you know, both have willingly already talked about these issues. So it can help the divorce process, as I said, to become potentially at least a little less contentious on those specific issues which have already been agreed upon. Uh, you know, an advantage of prenups is, as I think you also kind of said, is that it can protect each person, like sort of from each other's individual debts, meaning like that person A's, as we say, like student loan or car pay or whatever it may be, you know, that it could be like a prenup could sort of serve as a protectionary measure, in other words. And we talked about equitable distribution in the absence of a valid agreement in those states which have basically like a 50-50. So I know in the Western US, there's like community property states. So it's sort of like an equitable distribution, like a state like North Carolina, for instance, and you know, some others here in the Appalachian region. Um, this equitable distribution can apply, and basically, you know, it's sort of like a 50-50 kind of thing. So, and we also say like, just in general in the law, when it comes in the act, you know, just whether considering prenups or other aspects, we always want to consider the best interest of the child, of the children. So basically, um, it should not be done. You say it's an obvious thing, but it should not be done in the agreement, you know, to limit child support payments in a way, because that's in essence penalizing. Support payments are meant to be done in the best interest of the child, not of the parents. Um, And the last thing I'll kind of cover is basically, and hopefully this was seamless throughout, is basically what about a separation agreement? Sometimes we kind of would draw those up as we call it, like as a prelude or as a step before an actual divorce. So what a separation agreement, which is different from a prenup, but can be, a step between that and the divorce. And, as some states require living separate and apart for a certain period of time before the divorce, right? What usually is covered in something like in that agreement is, both the parties and also like an inventory, as we call it, or a schedule of all the property which is listed in good faith. Not that anybody's hiding any assets, but listing of the inventory of the property. The previous prenuptial agreement should be, as we say, incorporated or referenced therein. Um, and also you can have like audited financial statements for both people. You can have a forensic accountant, to validate that. And then also you talk about support, alimony, property division, and also potentially like shared custody arrangements, visitation, things like that, which of course get more looked at and dealt with during the actual divorce proceedings and custody and later on through the family court. But that kind of covers what I was wanting to talk about. As far as I'll say this as a general matter. Okay. So yes, I've done several of these, and yes, it's had Muslim clients and folks of other faiths as well. But everything we kind of talked about here, I would say is in accordance, with what would be deemed as Islamic law or provisions. So I want to say that as well. Could say it at the beginning, but I'm saying that as well. So that's my thoughts, Aasiyah, right under the 25. Thanks.
Well, awesome. Okay, so let me go ahead and start my video. And thank you for letting me come back here because we've got questions coming in.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, let me like fix my Zoom here for a minute. Okay, so I'm just gonna pin myself. I'm gonna go ahead and look into our chats. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through all the questions and answers in the chat. Excuse me. I'm still overcoming a bad cough, and then I got sick again today. So for the third time in 3 months. I'm not sure what's going on, but anyways, so we're gonna go through our chat question and answers, and then I did get some questions and answers on WhatsApp as well that I'll go ahead and I'll also ask. And hopefully we'll even have time for all of you to also be able to raise your hands and to be able to ask your questions so we can get you to engage more. Okay. All right. So the first question that I saw that came in was, would a prenup created in the US be upheld in a different country?
Hmm. Uh, likely answer is no, because generally speaking, within the U.S., what we have, and this goes to other areas of law as well, but kind of we're speaking of prenups, is that there's a principle of what we call comity, comity, which basically means agreements drafted by lawyers in other states,
Right.
and are relative to be generally respected and enforceable, but that generally doesn't carry over internationally. So, but I'm happy to, if the person would like to, follow up, I can look into something or to get it. It's not something that generally comes up, but no, generally speaking, the laws are deemed to apply within the U.S. So,
Yeah, that's what I kind of figured too. The laws are different between here and the US. And so it can be a little bit difficult to try to, see how that would work. But all right, perfect. Thank you for that. So the next question that has come up is, what if I have, now this was message to me, so I'm just gonna let you know. What if I have a house before I get married and with a prenup that states I want to keep that separate, but I sell it during the marriage and use the money to buy a different home?
That's a good question. What I would say is that assuming that it was in a, how do I say this? Assuming that it was covered by provision in a validly recognized, enforceable prenuptial agreement, and both parties know about it and their counsel. Okay, um, I would have an addendum or basically a reference incorporated therein, saying that the property, which is like in essence, the replacement house, I would cover that one as well under provision. You know what I mean? Like the default would be basically, and I can know that that's what the questioner was getting at, is since that's a property acquired during the marriage, then it would basically be deemed, as a default, as joint property. I would basically say to be careful to like incorporate that, cover it with a new provision. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that does make sense. I hope that that answers the question there. Okay. We got another question here. Are there legal circumstances where assets separated by a prenuptial agreement can be overridden by the equitable distribution idiom?
Yeah, I would say if the, hmm, okay. Generally speaking, no, because, well, assuming, how do I say this? Assuming the lawyer drafts it competently, then a point of, I think as a covered of having, okay, equitable distribution applies to provisions, things which aren't covered in the prenup. The reason you cover it in the prenup is to have it accounted for the way you want to. So as long as the prenup is in that provision are validly written, then no equitable distribution wouldn't override it. Does that make sense? What I'm saying is equitable distribution applies when it's not covered under a prenup. The reason to cover it under a prenup is because that's how you two are willingly to have it covered. So as long as the provision is written validly and in compliance with local and state law, then that would, what's that term? That would like supersede, you know, the equitable distribution. Am I making sense? If I say it again, it's becoming circular. Basically, as long as it's a valid prenup, equitable distribution doesn't apply. That's my point.
All right, awesome. Okay, thank you for that. And then, of course, if
Oh, let me throw in one thing though. So
oh,
sorry.
okay.
I do want to throw this in there. Remember how he talked about child support payments should not be limited under a prenup. We're not trying to give somebody like a free pass to like say, "Oh, we lower child support payment in this," because the children, you know, should be covered. Everything should be done in the best interest of the children. So the one circumstance immediately I would think of which could be superseded by equitable distribution kind of provision is if it's a lower child support payment, because that's seen as like punitive to the child. So I want to throw that in there. So
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that. Hopefully these questions are being answered. Of course, you can always unmute and ask for clarification when we're done. So how much does it usually cost to get a prenup set up? That's actually a good question. How much is it generally?
that's a good question. Hmm. It depends. Okay, basically anywhere between $1,000 to $2,000. I'm not speaking for myself personally, but generally speaking, for a counsel, let's say who's medium experienced and who does this regularly, 1 to 2,000. But I would say that's maybe where it comes into maybe wealth level and meaning like the more complex the agreement is, the longer it is, you know, it's a range, but let's just say $1 to $2,000. So.
All right, awesome. So 1 to 2,000. So are there any payment plans? I'm joking. All right. And the next question I see is what is a breakdown of, say, intellectual property that may be generated with the help of a spouse during a marriage, but have not been included in a prenup? Would the rights be split down the middle 50-50 at the end of that marriage? And then the other question is there a way to protect intellectual property that has not been created yet at the start of a marriage? And how does one ensure equitable distribution? Good question.
Hmm. Well, I appreciate you saying that. I'll have to think about it as I think I know the answers, but each part I'll have to read it as I'll go a little slower. So I breakdown that may be generated during a marriage, but not being included. Well, you're right to say. I think you kind of answered in the second part, Amit, is uh, right about 50-50 because that would be kind of deemed as as something else, which is not covered under the original prenup, right? So as a default, in other words, I think you kind of answered it in your second part. So is there a way to protect this that has not been created yet at the start of a marriage? So basically, what you talk about with your lawyer and is the having like an amendment made or basically having like it would have to be almost like a separate agreement because of course it's something which is not done at the beginning of the marriage. So I would say the default is that yeah, it's something that would be 50-50 as are other assets acquired during the marriage. Like it's not something where IP is treated differently than other things. Am I making sense on that? Or am I clear on that? It's not like it would be treated as, let's just say, like jewelry or a car or something else acquired during the marriage. It's not that it's. I will say this: you have a good point. Intellectual property and this good point on that in the theoretical sense. And this is one reason I like doing IP is that it's such a new area of the law that there's not like hundreds of years of case law on some of these areas, like a patent or whatever else, like there is on like criminal law and Miranda and all these other things. So, to answer the direct question, it's something you need to talk with your lawyer about having like a separate new. It wouldn't be called a premarital agreement because it's not premarital, right? About having a separate, basically, let's call it like a property provision drawn up but in the absence of that, it's treated like any other type of asset and to be basically jointly owned. So, yep.
Thank you. Thank you for your
Sure.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. The next question, can you give an example of a good prenup you have seen or drafted, simple or complex?
Yeah. Can I? Uh, let's see. There's a very good sample, and I think I messaged with to Aasiyah and a couple other folks.
And I can
Can
send
I?
that sample. I can
Yeah,
send
yeah.
that. Do you
Oh,
want
go
to
ahead.
share it on the screen? Do you have it?
Let me. Yeah. Do I have it on the?
And if not, I should have it. Hold on.
Yeah, can I maybe give 30 seconds? Let me see if it's on one of my WhatsApp. It may take me a second to go between screens. So if you have that, Asya, please,
Actually,
or if or you know,
I don't have it. I don't think you sent it to me because I don't see it in my attachments. I thought you did. Yeah, I know we talked about that.
yeah. Let me.
If not, do you think you can email an example and then I'll go ahead and send it out to everybody with the recording?
Yeah, I think that works well. Oh, let me see if I can pull up. I want to ask a silly question. I'm still on the. I'm still there, right? Okay. I need to. Let me give me 1 second, uh, please.
No
Uh,
worries. You can't share your screen. You have it where you can share.
okay, got it. Um, let me.
I think your internet connection's going a little bit wonky, Omar. Okay.
Okay. Let's see. Still here, right? Okay, cool. Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I will have it. Someone actually direct message DM'd it to me on WhatsApp. So we're gonna see if we can get it, or I will, or one of us will send it directly after this call. Poolside, thanks for the question.
All right, awesome. Okay, so we'll get that sent out to all of you. How are prenups managed if before marriage there were no kids for both parties, but after marriage the couples have kids and there was a divorce?
That's a very good question.
Now,
How
wouldn't
are
you already
managed?
kind of, I guess my question follow
Yes.
up to that would be, wouldn't you already kind of stipulate something like, should the couple have kids, then, this is the provisions for that?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
That and that's yes, that's let me see. I'm just seeing how I know what the answer is. I'm seeing how I want to word it. So pardon me for going back to my notes for a second. Um, all right. So remember how he talked about like the support and alimony provisions, basically at the, a few minutes ago. So kind of as you said, Aasiyah, well, what happens is that you at the time of drafting those family related agreements provisions within the original prenup, you sort of make provisions for, and children like who were born, after the marriage date. You know what I mean? During the marriage. So yeah, you sort of covered in the original agreement. So I think that covers the question, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. All right, the next question is, in the inherited gifted property subject, oh, I'm sorry, is the inherited gifted property subject to equitable distribution in the absence of prenup? Can we separately label, identify gifted inherited property from the divorcing spouse?
Read how this makes sense.
So I guess if it's like if another party has inherited or gifted some type of property, then
Mhm.
it's a subject to that distribution if there is no prenup. So if there isn't a prenup, do they still have to like divide that in family law, I guess?
Okay.
And I
So
would think so because of community law, right? Like if you don't have a prenup, community law comes into play. Yeah.
yeah, so here's what I say on this is that remember I talked about in good faith and full disclosure at the beginning of the, so or let's say near the beginning of the talk, is that when you're originally making your schedule, as we call it, a schedule inventory of assets, that you're bringing into the marriage, it's it's good. There's a good faith presumption, and your lawyer will remind you, as I do to my client, right? Is that tell me in good faith, what you have, right? So basically, let me see if how we're covering with the question. That covers with whether it's, as we talk about inheritance, property received by inheritance, through acquisition, meaning purchase, through gift, through however it's acquired. Basically, you're supposed to fully disclose your assets at the beginning of the agreement. These are done in good faith, is what I'm saying. So, can you separately label, identify? Yes, because you're able to separately identify, I would say, any discernible asset, whether it be whatever type of asset is, financial account. We talked about stocks, bonds, talked about jewelry, cars, houses. One of the advantages of a prenup, as we talked about, is that you're able to label at the current time and also going forward, as I say, before and during the marriage and even after, how you want to be labeled. So you're basically in control with your lawyer, and both spouses are, as to how you want to identify the property. So I would say the same, whether it's however it's acquired, whether it's via inheritance, whether it's acquired gift, whether you buy it, whatever it is, you could basically, as long as it's legally done, which it would be, then you can keep something separate, even an accrual of value, even an accrual of profits in a business. If your business, as we talk about, like locally owned, business goes the millions or somehow, you can still decide how you want to allocate that. So I guess to answer your question directly, Abu, is that yeah, you could separately label whether it's however it's acquired by inheritance or however, and you can maintain that designation. So the answer is yes.
All right, awesome. Thank you. All right, the next question is, what happens to international assets? Are they included in prenups?
That's a good question. Hmm. Basic, well, it's not something I myself have done with, because I think I've mentioned I've on as far as like prenups, family law things. I'm more of a corporate healthcare lawyer. I haven't dealt with this yet, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
The presumption is, though, I'm still going to say that property acquired in the U.S., contracts drawn in the U.S. are recognized in other states and nationally. When you're getting into international things, then you're also looking into whether agreements or assets, how things are taxed, or they even recognized in both countries. You're getting in a kind of, it's a good question. It's not something I've dealt with. Let me look into it, Muhammad, and get back to you. But my general answer is no. We're talking about things within the U.S. being recognized amongst the 50 states. So, but let me get back to you on that. Is that cool?
All right, awesome. So the next question, how does meher relate to the whole prenup thing?
That's a good question. Um, hmm. Basically, I've treated, and as far as I know, others have treated as it's just as a different, not transaction. It's separate. I would just say it's separate. Now, whether you want to have it referenced within your prenup or not, and to have it designated, I guess or let's say guess you could have it, valued and talked about in your prenup, but it's just basically separate things. So,
Right. So I guess following up with that question,
sure.
if there's so if the meher is discussed, um, and there's the Islamic contract, which is where the meher would
Yes.
be, right? But then
Yes.
like in the prenup, if the prenup and the Islamic contract are kind of together at that moment, then would you still kind of make sure that the meher is at least mentioned?
Yeah, that's a good point. If it's done, I haven't had this for one of my clients come up at the same time and saying, but I would say what we do for in general in the law when it's something called incorporation by reference. I
Mhm.
mean, you basically have an amendment drawn in. You haven't mentioned certainly in terms of the assets and in terms of the schedules when you're doing the habitual in initial valuation and separation of assets. Okay, you mention it, talk about it. But I would say you also incorporate it by reference by having a separate document or page at the beginning. Sorry, at the
Right.
end. So does that make
Right.
sense?
Yeah. So
If
because
it's
like
not done subsequently, then it's separate. Go ahead. Sorry.
right, no, it's fine. Just because Taliesin does make a point that meher is a gift and it is her property Islamically, right? So as
Mhm.
long as it's being mentioned, this is her gift. I think the thing too that we find sometimes is sometimes the meher is not paid right away or it's not paid within a certain amount of time. And then if two people
Yes.
get divorced, then what would the meher specifically state in that prenup
Um,
agreement as well, right? Because
right.
that person
Yes.
didn't get that meher, that woman
Yes.
was supposed to get it and she didn't throughout her marriage.
Yes. Yes. That yeah, I think I not to rehash, but I think it's something if it's done relatively subsequently same time, it's something which you basically mention on the schedule of assets, talk about, and as I said, incorporate by reference on a separate page.
Got
So,
it.
but it's
Okay.
deemed as two separate things. I'm clarifying that. So,
Awesome. All right. So somebody said they had a follow-up on the premarital home question that they had asked earlier.
yeah.
Would my spouse have to sign that addendum on the prenup for the home? What if he or she refuses to sign the addendum during the marriage? So I think this was that question
Hmm.
where he was saying, well, what if I put the home and then I want to sell it later?
Right. Um. Hmm. All right. So basically, there's not a mutual assent on the issue.
Hmm.
Um. Read it again to think about it. On the premarital home, would you have to sign up on that addendum? Oh. So this actually isn't relating to like selling it and having a second house. This is just talking about it. This is just talking about one home. We're not relating to the other question of a sale and a second house and all that.
No, this
This
is
is
related
totally
to
separate from that.
Right. It's related to the
Okay,
question that
okay.
was asked above. What if I have a house before I get married with a prenup that states I want to keep that separate, but I sell it
Oh,
during the marriage and use the money to buy a different home? So then the follow-up question was,
okay.
yeah, was that question on would my spouse have to sign that addendum or on the
Mhm.
prenup for the home? And what if he or she refuses?
Oh, got it. Okay. Um, think that for a second. Basically, this is done to, okay. The whole, one of the main and whole ideas of this is it's done with mutual assent, right? That's why it's done in the beginning, and you're deemed to be not combative and that. So I would say that same thought process comes up, whether it's another house or car, or whatever it may be, is that so if the other spouse is there's not mutual assent, they're being difficult, they're not going to sign that. If they don't sign that, then
Yes, if they refuse to sign.
it's just basically not put in then. I mean, it just wouldn't, it would just be deemed to be, it would go back to the default then, it just, it wouldn't go in because it's not agreed to. So,
Right.
am I making sense?
Right, right. But okay, yeah, I think it does make sense in that area. But if they're refusing to sign that, wouldn't that also then make that prenup void if they're not signing that one addendum?
No, it would still be validly enforceable. It just, how do I say this? Um, it would just go under equitable distribution. It would just be deemed to be jointly owned or shared. Like it would just, it would, it would default. In other words, it would be default. There wouldn't be, it wouldn't be uniquely treated. It would just be like, oh, we don't put this in the clause. We don't put this in the agreement. We don't add it to it because it's not agreed to. So it just is deemed to be jointly owned. It's, am I making sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It doesn't affect the original agreement because that's all deemed to be. All right, let's step back. So, in the original thought with this is that things are deemed to be done collaboratively and with mutual assent. All right. So, if something and it's deemed to be valid at the time it's done. Okay. So, if something later on is not done with the same thought process of collaboratively and with mutual assent,
Mhm.
then it just wouldn't go in. It wouldn't invalidate everything else. It would
Right.
just go under the default of jointly owned. Right? Does it make sense? So,
Okay. The next question, is child support affected by the prenup as long as child support is fair under the state and federal law? Please elaborate. And I think actually skipped another question before that, but we'll go back to that question.
all right, the next one.
So is child support affected by the prenup as long as child this was actually sent to me as a direct message, so I'm just reading it. Is
Oh, okay.
child support affected by the prenup as long as child support is fair under the state and federal law? Please elaborate.
Is child support
I feel
affected?
like that kind of goes into the first question that was asked here.
Mhm.
Can a clause be added to not have any alimony or child support payments and the burden be borne by the incumbent parent holding primary custody? I mean, here's the thing though, Islamically, you still have to pay child support. You still have to pay for your wife.
Right,
So you can't
and
really get away from
legally,
that.
it's not. This is like these are are not drawn up. I think I said it in different words, but in agreement with what you're saying, Asia. But these are not meant to be done as like escape maneuvers, right? The
Exactly.
children who are not mutually assenting because they're not of age and deemed to not be adults, right, are not. They're not signing it. So like, how can they be penalized? So that's kind of what I'm saying is that it's just like these aren't like, it's not like a sneaky way to escape and a support payment is what I'm trying to say. So no, something which is not, and I think I said as well, everything is deemed to be done in, generally speaking, in family law. Okay, and this is family law kind of thing where things are deemed to be done in the best interest of the child, mainly because
Right.
that's what's fair and that's what most fair thinking adults and courts and everybody wants. Okay. And also because children can't speak for themselves, so to speak, and all that. So, no, anything which goes again to answer, I think, both questions, sort of, I would say, is escaping a fair obligation as a parent. That's not a motive or a something that could be done because, oh, we were honest and listed out everything else, so let's see if we can kind of reduce this. No, that this is not done to reduce support payments, which are otherwise these aren't to penalize the kids. So
Right. So I guess that next question then was that is child support affected by the prenup as long as child support is fair under the state and federal law? So please elaborate. So I think it's kind of like the same. You just answered it.
Not certainly not lowered. I would say that's interesting. You said the word fair, fairly done. So, let me answer this way. Support and alimony, the familial, I would call it the personal elements, are certainly incorporated and covered under these parental agreements. Not just the assets, not just the money, as I'd say, the finance. We're talking about people and the elements. Okay, so custody and alimony are covered. If as long as fairly means that it's in accordance with the federal stat and state statutes, and it's not lowering the amounts, then yeah, you're allowed to make what I'm saying is provisions for the amount of support payments, as long as they're in compliance with applicable state and federal statutes, and even more than, let's just say, not less than what they are. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. How are and so we got a few more minutes left and there's a lot of questions to go through. So I'm going to try to see if we can get through them, but if we can't, and I apologize for that, Omar, how's the best way for everyone to get a hold of you if they have questions that they want you to answer for them?
Yeah, I would say by call or email. Call, generally speaking, is good, or WhatsApp DM. We all have that. So by phone or by email if it's a lengthier question. So can I list both, or can?
Yeah, go ahead, put it in the chat.
Okay.
So that would be great because then they'll get in touch with you through email or
Yes.
WhatsApp.
Yes.
If you don't happen to have, excuse me, if you don't happen to have the number or you didn't get it on time, let me know and I'll send it to you as well. I'm gonna actually kind of open this up for the next 5 minutes. There is one question though that I did get on WhatsApp that I do want to ask you to just kind of make sure that I can answer because there's a lot of questions that were sent to me, but I was not able to get to them. So I apologize. We're gonna get those questions answered at some point. Maybe we could create like a Word doc and you can maybe go through the questions and answer them, and then we can send out a Word doc to everybody if that's something that you think would be feasible. Okay. So this question is, Assalamu alaikum. In the case of a second marriage late in life with no minor children, can we assume that assets are safe without a prenup if only nikah is performed and no legal court marriage? I've heard that some states are recognizing nikah as a legal marriage. So in the case of a divorce, premarital assets may become marital property. Have you heard of this?
I got lost in the question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so let me say it again. Actually, let me see if I can just copy it because I can actually copy it.
Yeah, if you,
Put
I
it
was
in
going to
here
say, if you don't mind.
in my because apparently I can copy stuff on my iPhone and put it on here. Okay, so I just put it in there.
Cool. Okay. Appreciate it. In case with second marriage late in life with no children. Can we assume that assets are safe? Can we assume that assets are safe? I've heard that some states are recognizing nikah. So in the case of a divorce, premarital assets may become marital property. Have you heard of this? So if you don't mind, I'm gonna answer this in 2 or 3 steps because it becomes like a multi-part question here. Very good question, but it's like 4 questions together. So let's see. So number one, are assets safe without a prenup? In general, I'm going to kind of stop it there and then go to the next step. Yeah, yes, prenups are not required. And you know that there are, as you talked about, there are general state, especially state, but state and applicable federal statutes which apply how property passes in a state. We know from like inheritance and other laws, but like, we're talking about equitable distribution, or in the Western US, there's community property, which is generally 50-50, but equitable distribution, as we sometimes say to clients, is doesn't necessarily, it's done with the thought of fairness, but it's not always equal. Okay. So in other words, are assets safe without a prenup? The answer, I would say almost always is yes, but want to define the word safe. What do we mean by safe? Are they covered? Yes. Is it in the way somebody wants to? Not necessarily. So I would say it's safe, but it might not be preferable. Okay. Now the next step. Without a, if only nikah is performed in no legal court marriage. Okay. So I would ask a client or a friend or whoever, like, why the legal court marriage wasn't done. But that wouldn't affect necessarily the legal outcome of it. But I would ask, like, why the legal court marriage wasn't done. Some states are recognizing nikah as a legal marriage. Premarital assets may become marital property. Premarital assets may become marital property. So, the question is just if I heard of this. Yes, I've heard about. I don't want to say this. I've heard. I'm familiar with all of this. Yes. So I personally, I like to, I think of every, obviously, I like to think of the human aspect first. Of like, I don't look at like a client or even a friend who I'm helping out, like, let's say pro bono, whatever, without charge in a legal matter. I don't look at it as just like a document. It's like, what's good for this person, right? Everybody's a person. Everybody should be treated. I want somebody to do great, and so do other lawyers. It's not just about what's in this document. It's about what's in somebody's heart and what's going to be good for these people. Okay, so I would ask, like, you know, not to speak for others, but I would think they would ask too: is when were the marriages done? Why was there in a con not a legal court marriage? And it looks like you're mentioning a second marriage. And when we're talking about late in life, like, how late in life are we talking about? I would also ask that. Because that, when we bring in later on in life, that's going to affect the valuation of certain assets and application of, I'm going on too long, but that's going to affect the application of retirement provisions. And and then I would also bring up, you're talking about a second marriage with no minor children. How many children were in the first marriage? And was there a prenup for the first marriage? Like,
Right.
I can make 5 more questions out of this, but the answer is yes, I'm familiar with this. Yes, there's several aspects and layers to this, and I'm happy to follow up with an individual on these issues. But I'm going to ask, like, what happened with the prior? How was the first marriage legally resolved? And just man, this will be a very interesting case to take on, or situation to talk about. So.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I know a lot of you still have questions, but we have run out of time. It's 7:01 p.m. here Pacific, 10 o'clock Eastern. So for those of you who have come today, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. We appreciate it. We appreciate you being here. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time and not take up more time. Reach out to Omar. I know I see a lot of questions here that we still needed to answer, but please reach out to Omar. He did put everything, his contact information in the chat. So if you can screenshot it or copy it, that would be great. And maybe we can do another one again. If this is something that's really popular and important, people really are enjoying this, I think we should do it again. So
Throwing one other topic. I want to thank everybody as well, especially Aasiyah, and I'm happy to do on, not to overpromise here, but I'm happy to do on other topics as well, more in my forte of maybe corporate law or employment is any other issues people may want, or even to even offer to take any phone calls about anything in the law. So just want to say that. But thank you, Aasiyah.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you all so much for coming. The recording will be sent out to all of you. If you do not hear from me by Friday, because apparently I've got a lot on my plate, just let me know. I will send out the recording to each and every one of you. My email address, if you don't have it, you can just email me at my work address, or not, this is my personal address. Send me an email there. I will go ahead and I'll send out the recording. And then I also know if you all registered, I have your emails already, so I can be able to send it out. You are very welcome. Yes, you are so welcome. Omar, thank you again so much for being here.
Oh,
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right.
All right.